Time travel. Did you know that time travel has been a concept in the human imagination for centuries? Long before it became a popular theme in science fiction. The earliest mention in our history of time travel was in 400 BCE in the ancient Hindu epic, the Mahabharata. The H.G. Wells novel from 1895 titled The Time Machine is credited as the work that popularized the concept of time travel using a machine. I think it's safe to say that we as humans have always considered and dreamed about the ability to time travel. What would that mean to you? What would you do with this ability? I remember when I was a child and watched for the first time in the 1960 version of the epic film The Time Machine, I was struck by the question given at the end of this film. You guys remember? The question was, what 3 books would you choose to take back in time to rebuild civilization? I sat there for a minute, man, and I thought, wow, what a question, especially for a 7-year-old or 8, something like that. Let me explain for those of you who haven't seen it. In the movie, the Doctor returns from the future to his own time. Of course, he tries to get friends and people in power to believe his story about time travel and what the world will become if we did not change our course. Certain destruction and rebirth of civilization of uneducated humans would be our fate. Of course, they didn't believe him. None except for his best friend and the housekeeper, who both stayed after they rest had left so they could keep an eye on their disturbed time-traveling friend. But the Doctor steps off into the laboratory, and bam! Before you know it, both he and the time machine were gone. It was amazing. I wanted to build one myself. The two left behind, his friend and the maid, noticed that he had taken nothing with him except for 3 books missing from the bookshelf. Well, at this time, the question is asked to the viewer, what 3 books would you take into the future? So I ask you, what 3 books would you guys take with you? What would you take with you to teach a new civilization of how to best build peace and health and prosperity with all the things that, you think we could, that would best guide us towards that goal? A better tomorrow, if you will. As the credits rolled, I sat in my room in deep thought and wondered, as I do today, what books would I take? I still don't know. That's a hard one. So, time travel is just science fiction, right? I mean, the possibility to go back or forward in a timeline is crazy. It's impossible, right?
We're going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west.
Stop this. A UFO.
Is time travel possible? To answer that question, we start with Einstein's theory of relativity, which states that space and time are relative and depends on the observer's frame of reference, which means that if the laws of physics are same for all observers moving at a constant speed, and the speed of light is constant for all observers, regardless of their motion, that's E equal mc squared, by the way, time flow depends on how fast an object is traveling. The faster you go, the slower time passes. And also gravity. The more forceful the gravity, the slower time goes. You guys might know that by watching a movie called Interstellar. Classic. Anyway, an example of this is if a person were to hang out near the edge of a black hole, where gravity is prodigious. Only a few hours might have passed for them, while 1,000 years went by for someone here on Earth. When the person from the black hole returned to Earth, they would have effectively traveled to the future. This is a real effect. It's completely uncontroversial. Nobody can argue with it. Now that we know time travel to the future is a real thing, what about traveling to the past? And Would we even want to risk doing it if we could? Science has come up with a few ways that time travel to the past might be possible. An early solution to time travel, written in the 1920s, presented an idea that involved a massive long cylinder that, when spun fast in a manner of straw rolled up between your palms, it would twist space, the three-dimensional expanse that contains all matter and objects, and also time, the indefinite continued progress of existence and events in the past, present, and future, as regarded as a whole. Makes sense? That's space-time, folks. Just explained. The understanding that this object could act as a time machine, allowing one to travel to the past, only happened in 1970s, a few decades after scientists discovered a phenomena called closed time-like curves. Closed time-like curves. This is space-time trajectories that return to their starting point without violating the law of special relativity. It sounds pretty complex, but it's really not. So now that we have the basic understanding of what it would take, in theory, to time travel, let's see what challenges we face today that stops us from jumping into time. First off, science tells us that traveling to the future is in theory a possibility, but to travel to the past is logically impossible. Why is that? Well, let's discuss the grandfather paradox. This happens when the past is manipulated in any way, thus resulting in a contradiction. If a time traveler went back in time and assassinated their grandfather in his childhood, it could result in a situation where the time traveler's parents are not even born, which then results in the traveler himself not existing. So he or she could not have time traveled in the first place. That's the grandfather paradox. This theory has holes in it, though. When it was suggested that infinite timelines could occur, making anything possible. So just because you went back in time and unalived your gramps on a one line, on another, you might not. The second law of thermodynamics states that things in the universe can either remain the same or become more disordered. It's like saying you can't unscramble an egg once it's been cooked. According to this law, the universe can never go back exactly to how it was before. July 29th, 1998, Art Bell, host of Coast to Coast AM, had what he called an open timeline. Do you guys remember that? He'd have different timelines for ghost stories, things like that, for people to call in. He wanted to get calls from people who claimed to be time travelers. Of course, this made a lot of nuts call in, claiming to be from the past or the future. But by then, Art received a fax to his studio. It read, "Dear Art, I had to contact your show when I heard alleged time travelers calling in from any time past the year 2500 AD. Time travel was invented in 2034. Offshoot of a certain successful fusion reactor research allowed scientists at CERN to produce the world's first contained singularity engine. The basic design involves rotating singularities inside a magnetic field by altering the speed and the direction, allowing you to travel in time. Time itself can be understood in the terms of connected lines. When you go back in time, you travel on your original timeline. When you turn your singularity engine off, a new timeline is created, since you and your time machine are now there. Some interesting outcomes of this are: 1, you meet yourself as a younger person. I have done it, and I've even taken my younger version along for a few rides on the time machine before returning to my own timeline. Number 2, you can alter history in new universes that you have just created. Most of the time, the changes are subtle. Sometimes I'll notice a car model that doesn't exist yet, or books that come out late. Unfortunately, it was also discovered that anyone going forward in time from my 2036 hit a brick wall in 2564. Please pray that we discover the reason why there is no apparent future after 2564. That's a pretty hardcore fax to come into your radio show. After Art received that fax, his listeners went crazy with speculation. It would appear the mystery man influenced people. Something about him and his knowledge of time travel stood out among everybody else. A few weeks later, another fax arrives. It's John. He states that he plans to leave soon. He continued to say, typically, time travelers do not purposely affect the world lines they visit. Never. This mission is unusually long, and I've grown attached to some of the people I have come to know. Anyway, for my own reasons, I have decided to help this world line by sharing information about the future with a few people in hope that it will help their future. I realize that this is hard to believe, but once you receive this fax, I can send some pages from the Time Machine instruction manual and some pictures of the machine itself. 2 years would pass, and the mysterious faxes had stopped coming into Art's studio. Everyone was upset because they wanted so badly to see the images and hear the explanation of a working time machine. On this night, they would get their wish. A user under the name Time Traveler Zero popped up on the message boards on a site called the Time Travelers Institute. On November 2nd, 2000, he submitted his first post. It read, "Greetings. I am a time traveler from the year 2036. I am on the way home after getting an IBM 5100 computer system from the year 1975. My time machine is a stationary mass temporal displacement unit manufactured by General Electric. The unit is powered by 2 top-spin dual positive singularities that produce a standard of set Tipler sinusoids. I will be happy to post pictures of the unit." On the message board, as you can imagine, there were plenty of people who were skeptical. But Time Traveler Zero was specific and had specific knowledge of time travel. A Tipler cylinder is a theoretical method of time travel outlined in a paper by Frank Tipler in 1974. And what about the IBM 5100? Why would a civilization smart enough to travel through time be looking for what we would consider today ancient computer equipment? In John's timeline of 2036, it would be about more than 80 years old. John Teeter stated that the 5100 was needed to debug legacy computer programs in 2036 because Unix has a problem in 2038. That's true. Just like the computer problem in Y2K. You guys remember that craziness? That was when the software measured the year in 2 digits, and it was thought that the software would go nuts on New Year's Day 2000. And of course, this never happened, and all our fears were gone, but in 2036, the Network Time Protocol, the NTP, timestamps will overflow because the 64-bit binary fixed point timestamps roll over every 136 years. John said he was selected for the mission because his grandfather was involved in the original programming and assembly of the 5100. He said that IBM 5100 was needed because it could emulate the programs in older IBM mainframe languages. These facts about the system were true and unpublicized, which means either John worked with or close to IBM, or perhaps, I don't know, he could be from the future. In some of John's many posts online, he mentioned things that would happen or did happen on his timeline. John would say in 2008 that the world will start to realize that this isn't the place they thought it was. In the future, family once again is close, he says. Religion is taken serious. People read and talk, and they can multiply and divide in their head. John would also bring up things that did not come to pass, at least on our timeline. He stated that in the year 2004, that's when the United States Civil War would start, with Waco-type events occurring often and getting worse. And in 2015, there's a very short world war, but 3 billion people would be killed. John later stated in a post, "I become a soldier in 2015 after Russia launches an assault on the United States. Omaha, Nebraska is now our American capital, and the U.S. Constitution is rewritten, reflecting changes due to the conflict. Mad cow disease is one of our major concerns, and the purpose of time travel is to restore environment to what it was before the war. John kept his promise and sent diagrams and instructions with images of the time machine and how it works. You can check them out online. One man even tried to patent this device in hopes of building it, but that never happened. Over the course of John's post and conversations on the message boards, he becomes very close with a woman known as Pamela. They would private message back and forth, and Pamela would later provide an IBM futuristic patch and a letter from John. John told Pamela that he would send her a video before he went back to his own timeline, and gave her a private song to listen for in the video so she would know it was really from him. John Titor's last post was on the message boards April 3rd of 2001. He said he was returning home. Nobody has ever seen or heard of John Titor again. Pamela still says she has never received a video from John. So, was John Titor a real time traveler? Did he in fact come from a timeline somewhere to warn us about the future? Our future. And since many of the things John mentioned never happened, did his words of wisdom help to change our direction? Maybe to avoid, at least for the present, a dark future? And how long do we have before we face that future again? At the beginning of the show, I told you about the movie The Time Machine and how it fascinated me as a kid. The question they asked to the viewer: what 3 books would you choose to take with you to rebuild the world? For myself, I'm still not sure, guys. But I think the question begs us to ask ourselves, what would we change about how we are as a people? What things could have made life better, simpler, and perhaps what information would provide us with the best chance to live our lives without chaos and hate? One thing is for sure, the most powerful forces in our world are love and hate. And only we can decide which force to follow. And all the time in the world will never change that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on tonight's episode of Your Shadow Nation. Make sure to like and subscribe on our YouTube page at Shadow Nation Podcast. You just have to search for that. Okay, Shadow Nation Podcast on YouTube. Give us a like, please, and subscribe. It really does help. Please follow me on social media, Instagram at ShadowNat Podcast, the number 1, Facebook, Twitter, and be sure to check out our website at shadownation.com for over 16 years of epic archives. So, from the haunted back roads of America, this has been another episode of your Shadow Nation Podcast. Don't go changing America, because you know I won't. Because I love you. Good night, everybody.